Hi, I'm Pastor Dave, teaching evangelist for Lamb and Lion Ministries. Twice during Jesus' ministry, the Father's voice came down from heaven. Each time, the heavenly voice said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Have you ever wondered why the Father's voice uttered those words? Or why they were spoken at those exact times? I know I did. And that set me on a journey. You see, I had to study the Old Testament sacrifice system to find the answer to those two questions. In ancient times, when a sacrifice was offered to God, God had placed specific criteria on how each could be offered. He could reject or accept the sacrifice based on if the one bringing him the sacrifice honored his instruction. For example, before Moses and the law were established, Cain and Abel each brought a sacrifice, an offering to God. One God accepted, but the other God rejected. Some of the stipulations for bringing God a sacrifice were, first, the offering had to be something of value. If it lacked value to the one offering it, it would not be considered a sacrifice, meaning it had to cost the giver something. Another stipulation was the one's heart had to be right. In the case of Cain's offering, before his offering was ultimately rejected, God told Cain to do what was right or to do well, Genesis chapter 4. Then God warned if he chose not to, then sin would be lurking at the door, and unfortunately, Cain did not receive God's guidance. Honestly though, this blog is not about breaking down all the different types of sacrifices, whether it be animal or grains, the burnt offering or the peace offering. The purpose of this blog is to answer those two questions. Why did the Father's voice utter those words, and why were they spoken at those specific times? John the Baptist was from the tribe of Levi, which established him as a direct descendant of Aaron, Israel's first high priest. Well, how do we know this? The Gospel of Luke states that both of John's parents were of the line of Aaron. In the Old Testament, one of the duties of the priest was to go before God and present the sacrifice. Now, this priestly duty is essential to understanding because John the Baptist's baptism of Jesus could then be seen as a priestly presentation of an ultimate sacrifice. The sacrifice in the Old Testament were established as a temporary solution to one's issue with sin. They were designed to point forward to Christ's perfect and final sacrifice. In the Old Testament, a priest could begin service at age 30. Well, when Jesus was baptized, he was 30 years of age, and that was the beginning of his public ministry. On Mount Tabor, probably the mountain of Transfiguration, Jesus was beginning his final journey to Jerusalem. And as Jesus took his inner circle of disciples, Peter, James, and John, up to that mountaintop, Scripture describes the events these disciples experienced. The disciples saw Jesus transform into his future glory. And next to him, they saw Moses and Elijah alive and well. These two Old Testament figures represent the law, Moses, and Elijah, the prophets. Together, combined, they represent the entire Old Testament. So Jesus appearing in his glory signifies that he is superior to the law and the prophets. His words fulfill the words of the Old Testament prophecies. His ministry supersedes the work of the Old Testament. So again, let's answer the two questions. Why did the Father's voice utter those words, and why were they spoken at the times they were? First, both times a voice from heaven came down. The timing was critical. At Jesus' baptism, the voice said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." And at the Transfiguration, the voice said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." So as I mentioned, an Old Testament sacrifice had to be perfect, without blemish. It had to be something of value, not an everyday object or an animal that was ill or lame. However, for God to accept a sacrifice, the giver's heart had to be right, and the offering had to be given in faith. When the Father looked down upon Jesus, his voice echoed the words of acceptance. As Jesus began his public ministry, the first steps of becoming the Lamb of God, the Father looked down and proclaimed that this sacrifice is acceptable to me. As Jesus was beginning his final journey to Jerusalem, which concluded in his innocent blood being shed to pay the penalty for the guilt of your sin and my sins, the Father's voice once again proclaimed, "This is my Son, who I am well pleased," again announcing this sacrifice, Jesus, which is about to be offered, I find acceptable. And more importantly, God received this sacrifice. The audience at the time may not have understood the importance of these two events. However, you and I can understand how God publicly accepted the sacrifice of his only Son for the atonement of all sins. You know, Colossians 2 says the Old Testament sacrifices were a shadow of the things that were to come. Hebrews 9, God says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. 1 Peter confirms Jesus is the perfect, without blemish, Lamb of God. See, Jesus is the ultimate and final sacrifice that provides forgiveness, not temporary forgiveness, but eternal. He laid down his life willingly. As the Gospel of John proclaims, no one takes it from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. Jesus' sacrifice was followed by his resurrection. And he laid down his life and he took it up again, providing eternal life for all who believe in him and accept his sacrifice for their sins. The Father received the Son as the ultimate acceptable eternal sacrifice. God publicly proclaimed this. Now, as God publicly proclaimed it, do you accept Jesus, the Son of God, as your Savior? Have you publicly declared your trust, your faith, your love for Jesus? If not, well, maybe today can be that day. God bless you. Maranatha, Lord Jesus.